Hello there. Welcome to Just the Dis. This is a channel about Blu-rays. That's what we talk about here. My name's Brian, and I'm doing a quick collection update. I've got a variety of stuff, including stuff from Criterion and Paramount and Warner Archive, and maybe some imports. We'll see what I can get to here. Kino. But let's get into it quickly. Let's talk about Flight of the Phoenix. This is from 1965, directed by the great Robert Aldrich, who did things like The Dirty Dozen, and I really like Emperor of the North, but he did Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and tons of films. Just a really man's man kind of filmmaker, and this one is pretty unique, and I think at this time underrated. Maybe partially because it didn't have a Blu-ray. It is a Fox title, and we'll talk about that in a second, but it is sort of an early, almost proto-disaster movie. It also sort of has elements of the guys on a mission, subgenre, if you like, and it has a really killer cast. And the idea, let's see here if I can, a downed airplane is a motley group of men's only protection from the relentless desert sun in this psychologically charged disaster epic, one of the all-time great survival movies. James Stewart is the veteran pilot whose Benghazi-bound plane carrying passengers played by unshaven ensemble of screen icons, including Richard Attenborough, Ernest Borgnine, Ian Bannon, Dan Duryea, Peter Finch, George Kennedy. I want to say there's even more in here. Hardy Kruger is a big part of the movie, actually, as well. The crash lands in the remote Sahara Desert. As tensions simmer among the survivors, they find themselves forced to trust a coldly logical engineer, that's Hardy Kruger, whose plan to get them out may just be crazy enough to work or could kill them. Directed with the characteristic punch by Hollywood director, iconoclastic Robert Aldrich, The Flight of the Phoenix balances adventure with human drama as it conducts a surprising and complex examination of authority, honor, and camaraderie among desperate men. Well said, Criterion. It does do all those things. But yeah, it's a really interesting film because the plane crashes and then it's like, oh, we'll be rescued in 3 days. Oh, maybe we won't. Oh, maybe, you got a couple soldiers aboard, one of them played by Peter Finch, who was obviously yet to do his most famous role in Network. That would be almost 10 years, 11 years off. But he's very good in this. Hardy Kruger is incredibly cold and calculating and unfeeling as a German engineer. And it's interesting to find out what his deal is. That's all I'll say. And both Attenborough and Jimmy Stewart have a certain history. They're both like, how did they end up in this very rat trappy kind of airline that they're involved with, and what brought them there. Also, Robert Aldrich's son is in the movie for a little bit, and that's an interesting point. But there's a lot of cool stuff about this release. One, like I said, it's a Fox movie, which is exciting because, as we know, Fox is now owned by Disney, and so there was a lot of speculation, maybe concern, that a lot of Fox movies were not going to be easy to license moving forward, and I don't know when this deal was struck or how easily it was struck, but I would love to think that Criterion has some kind of in with Disney in that they can maybe get a hold of some classic Fox titles, and this is an indication of that moving forward, so fingers crossed. That said, this release looks good and has some nice features, and it is this cool new conversation between filmmaker Walter Hill and film scholar Alan Silver is pretty neat. They talk about Aldrich, they talk about the writer Lucas Heller and his history, and it's just a good conversation, between the two of them. It's great to hear. I just love Walter Hill interviews in general. He's, one of my heroes as a filmmaker, and so it's great to hear him praising a filmmaker he loves. There's a new interview with biographer Donald Dewey on actor James Stewart and his service as a bomber pilot. And then you have an essay by filmmaker and critic Gina Telleroli. And you have this really cool little plane thing you can assemble there. I'm not going to show that very long, and if you've seen the movie, you'll know why. I'm withholding that. But it is cool because you can put it together into your own little model plane. I think that's a nice touch by Criterion. I like that they include stuff like that. So here's your little booklet with the essay, which is a little thin. Not too much happening there, but still a very nice release and a movie that I definitely dig. I hadn't seen in years, but used to be like a favorite of mine. When it came out on DVD, I remember I watched the DVD a few times and was a big fan. So I was very excited to see Criterion put The Flight of the Phoenix out on Blu-ray. Like I said, this is an all-star cast, and if you like disaster movies and guys on a mission kind of movies, this is a good one. And it even has, like I said, it's got Ernest Borgnine and George Kennedy, two of the stalwart actors who are in just about every one or the other of them is in just about every disaster movie ever made. So nice lineage there. So that's one. Now, okay. This is Ordinary People from 1980. This is the Best Picture winner, and it's the one that everybody points to and is like, what? Because it was the same year as The Elephant Man. It was the same year as Raging Bull. I know those are great movies. I like this better. That's just me. However, just going to say it. I know it's the thing that we're all concerned about here. This cover is not particularly great. I'm not a fan of it. I really wish they could have just even gone with something as simple as the original. Key art is fine. I know you want to redesign it for the new market, but I just don't think this does any favors. It kind of just makes the film look cheap ultimately, and that's too bad because it's great. It's a really powerful film. So this is the film of this story. I mean, is of this family here. Okay. The mother is played by Mary Tyler Moore. The father is Donald Sutherland, and their son is Timothy Hutton. I'm going to give you a little backstory so that you can understand the movie. There's some of this you wouldn't get right away, but I think I need to make it a little clear as to what's happening. At the beginning of the film, we see Timothy Hutton wake up from a nightmare. It's something about a boat accident. We come to find out that he was on a boat with his older brother, Bucky, who we quickly come to find out was like the favorite son of the family. And Bucky drowned. And so now this family is trying to pick up the pieces, sometime after that has happened. Okay. This is directed by Robert Redford, I should say, and based on the novel by Judith Guest, screenplay by the great Alvin Sargent. And so anyway, Timothy Hutton is really struggling. His character Conrad has been in a hospital situation for about 4 months after what we find out was a suicide attempt. And he's struggling to sort of reintegrate himself. He's going back to school. We see him hanging out with his friends, going to the swim team where M. Emmett Walsh is his coach, and really having a lot of trouble with these nightmares and just not being able to connect with not only his friends, but his mom. Donald Sutherland's character seems very warm and compassionate towards his son. And I think Mary Tyler Moore's character in a very different role than you're ever used to seeing her in. Because if you've seen the show, she's just so effusive, so bubbly, so warm. She couldn't be colder in this performance. And it's both sort of chilling and sad, but also just so alarming to see her put on that kind of a performance. And it's, like I said, it's really good stuff. So then, again, I won't go too far with this, but I have to bring in the Judd Hirsch character because this is a therapist that Timothy Hutton agrees to see. And that's some of my favorite stuff in the movie is when they're hanging out and talking and sorting through, what Timothy Hutton is dealing with, what the underlying, reasoning is, and what are some things that he needs to deal with to reconcile in order to move forward. And it's just really powerful, emotional stuff. It's almost like going to therapy yourself when you watch it. And so I just thought the Judd Hirsch character, he's kind of like no nonsense. He's kind of like a loose and hip kind of guy, but also just a very straight shooter, just a very straightforward and blunt kind of guy. And some people are taken aback by that. But anyway, so we're seeing the family deal with this turmoil. We're seeing Judd Hirsch and Timothy Hutton try and work it out. And it's Really, really powerful. It's a movie like I remember Steven Spielberg used to say that you couldn't put on The Shining and not finish it. I like The Shining. I'm not saying I like Ordinary People more than The Shining, but I will say when I put on Ordinary People, I have trouble turning it off. And that's me. And I may be the only person that has that problem. But that's the kind of movie it is for me. It is so engaging emotionally, and the characters are so... I don't know, maybe it's just where every time I've come back to it has been a time when I needed that kind of emotional connection to some characters, and it always hooks me back in. So it's really nice to see it in a wonderful Blu-ray for the first time. It has a cool new interview. I want to say about 11 minutes, Swimming in the Rose Garden. That's with Timothy Hutton, and he talks about his experience on the film. He talks about winning the Academy Award. He talks about, I'll leave that story for you to view it. But he also talks one specific thing that he had remembered that he heard about. I don't know if he knew about it at the time, but that Robert Redford had told everybody on the set, basically, don't talk to him. Now, he didn't say don't talk to him at all, but he said don't engage him deeply. Don't talk to him about the character. He was setting it up to make him feel a little bit isolated, which was something that maybe Timothy Hutton didn't know he needed, but it definitely helps the character. It helps the performance. That's one of those tricky things that directors do where you're like, I don't know, it's kind of a sneaky thing to do, but ultimately the performance benefited from it. So there's a few stories like that in there, and it's good stuff. And then they talk to, Feeling is Not Selective, they talked to Judith Guest about the novel, and she's just generally like, it was amazing. I got the call from Robert Redford, I didn't believe it was him, and just talks about her experience, and it's really cool. That she just really loved the adaptation, she loved the movies, she loved the performances. She was very happy with what they did. So anyway, this is a heavy emotional drama, but like I said, it's one that packs a punch and is incredibly memorable and emotional in a cathartic way by the end. And so I do definitely recommend it. It is a favorite of mine personally, and I'm so glad to have it on Blu-ray. Now we've got some stuff from Warner Archive. This is the most exciting of the three, I'll tell you. The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm. And this is a super cool movie that I had never really... I mean, I'd heard of it, but it incorporates, MGM and Cinerama joined forces to produce this lavish spectacular built around the lives of Willem and Jacob Grimm. Of course, we're familiar with them. Enchanting cinematic versions of three of their most popular fairy tales, The Dancing Princess, The Cobbler and the Elves, and The Singing Bone. Enhance the brothers' story. A bevy of talents in both front and behind the cameras lent their skills to create this delightful entertainment. Now meticulously restored to its original Cinerama glory, it is once again ready to enthrall audiences of all ages. As you can see, there's like animation and there's live action stuff, and this transfer is one of those transfers that they do at Warner Archive where you look at it and you go, this is just mind-blowingly beautiful to look at. The color is just gorgeous. The folks at Warner Motion Picture Imaging or whoever they have do their restorations with them, incredible job. And I should say, it includes not only this little booklet here, but you have disc 1 and disc 2. And so what you have here is you have the letterbox version, widescreen, regular, and then the Smilebox version. And for those unfamiliar with Smilebox, so this film's originally presented in Cinerama, which, if you don't know, was basically, I think it was like 3 movie screens stitched together, basically. And so it kind of went from one side of the auditorium all the way around. It bent around you. So it was immersive in that way. Now, when you watch it on widescreen, you can kind of tell something's not quite right. And I don't mean in a bad way, but you can tell that it's just so big in certain areas. And they definitely took into account the way they were filming it to be presented in Cinerama. So the Smilebox format does something that people may not like, but it is interesting in that it does try to simulate that curvature, and that it actually curves the image on your television. So you're seeing it kind of curving up, and that's why they call it Smilebox. And so you get a sort of a simulation of what the Cinerama experience would have been like. So you have both versions of the film included on 2 discs here. So you don't have to ever look at the Smilebox if you don't want to. But I do think it's interesting to look at it that way, and it is a bit more immersive, I think, than the letterbox version. But this is George Pal involved with this, and he's doing some of the sequences. I will say it's a little dull before they get into the actual fairy tale stuff, but once they're in it, that stuff is absolutely captivating and beautiful. And you have Lawrence Harvey and the great Jim Backus and Terry Thomas and Buddy Hackett and Barbara Eden and Yvette Mimieux and Russ Tamblyn. Russ Tamblyn is great in this. If you liked him in like some of his fantasy films that he did, this is a great example of what he can do. And I think he really fits into the fantasy world very well. Okay, so you see here, main letterbox version, announcement trailer, letterbox theatrical trailer, radio interview with Russ Tamblyn, radio interview with Yvette Mimieux, who looks gorgeous in this, by the way. Just absolutely stunning. Again, also fits really well into the fantasy world in terms of the way she looks. The epic art of the Brothers Grimm, the wonderful career of George Pal. Again, he's very much involved in this film. And you have different stuff on the Smilebox trailer, rescuing a fantasy classic documentary, Rothenburg, Germany location, commemorative plaque. That's what's inside there. And salute to William Forman. So just a really beautiful fantasy release from Warner Archive. Definitely my pick of theirs for this group of releases. Next up we have Captain of the Clouds, which is Technicolor. Also looks very good. This is a Michael Curtiz film. I'm a big Michael Curtiz fan. And this one is about sort of ragtag pilots in Canada. Brian McLean wants to fight, but what he gets is an assignment to flying new unarmed bombers across the Atlantic to England. Then near England's shores, enemy planes swoop out of the endless sky, spitting steel at the helpless bombers. If there ever was a time for McLean to prove his skills and courage, this is it. One of the first war-themed films to hit theaters after America entered World War II tells the expansive tale of rugged bush pilots who bring their flying savvy to the Royal Canadian Air Force. So you start out with this story of these, again, rough and tumble, seaplane flying pilots in Canada up in just very remote areas, landing on these lakes and generally being kind of crazy in the way that they fly. So that's the beginning of it. And then obviously it goes from there. But it looks good. It's got a rousing Max Steiner score. It's a good Cagney performance, and it's just a good, solidly constructed Michael Curtiz action adventure film, and one that I hadn't really ever heard of. So it was neat to see it. Dennis Morgan and Brenda Marshall are featured in the film, and I like Cagney a lot. He's great in this role. I'm trying to think if there's other folks. Oh, Alan Hale is in here, George Tobias, and Reginald Denny. Yeah, I dug this, and it looks great, as they always do. Warner Archive does a great job with their transfers, and this is, I think, virtually a film that not a lot of people know. So I definitely wanted to let people know about Captain of the Clouds, a very cool aviation film. And then last from them is A Star is Born, and now this is I want to say this is the original version, because this one is from 1937, I want to say. I will have to double check that. But I want to say it's from the 30s. Producer David O. Selznick turned his attention to Hollywood. And yes, 1937, original classic, directed by William A. Wellman. Great director. The Academy Award winner tells the story of the hopeful young actress Esther Blodgett, Janet Gaynor, whose career is launched by Norman Maine, Frederick March, a movie star who also wins the actress's heart. Esther becomes leading lady Vicky Lester, but as Norman's career flounders, he sinks into an abyss of alcoholism. Esther chooses to sacrifice her stardom to care for him, but he refuses to let her abandon her dreams. Remade 3 times in the years ahead, this original version has finally undergone a meticulous restoration from its original nitrate Technicolor camera negatives. The result is a revelation in a definitive presentation of this timeless classic. So very much looking forward to checking out this one. I have not watched this Blu-ray yet. Two Lux Radio Theater broadcasts with Janet Gaynor and Robert Montgomery, and then Judy Garland and Walter Pidgeon. Those are audio only. Classic WB cartoon, A Star is Hatched, WB shorts, and Taking the Count and Alibi Mark. But yeah, this is a long time coming to Blu-ray, considering the popularity of the most recent version of A Star is Born. I think most people know the James Mason version with Judy Garland from the 50s, but this one I think is far less seen, and so it's nice to have a new, spanking, beautiful Blu-ray of the original Star is Born for folks to check out from Warner Archive. Next up, we have Shakedown. This is from Kino Lorber. This is a pretty cool noir with Howard Duff, Brian Donlevy, Peggy Dow, and Lawrence Tierney. And this is one I'd never heard of. This is from 1950, so sort of late in the cycle. And it's all about a very ambitious photographer. You could call this like the original Nightcrawler, if you want. I'd call this like the roots of Nightcrawler. It's an obvious comparison to make, but when you see the movie, you'll see what I mean. So Howard Duff, who was married to Ida Lupino, an actor I don't necessarily love. Like, I don't know what it is about him. He just doesn't appeal to me for the most part. But this film, I will say, he impressed me for sure. He plays an ambitious photographer trying to break into the newspaper game, and he's sort of willing to do whatever he has to. If it means sort of romancing one of the editors to get a gig, an opening gig at the paper, despite the head editor-in-chief's misgivings about him, because you can kind of tell right away. He gets a lot of photos where he's like, I was at the right place at the right time, and you kind of feel like maybe he doesn't have the ethics that he should have for this job, because he gets some really good pictures, but at what expense is kind of the thing. And one of his biggest first photographs that he gets is he gets a front full photo of this underworld type who's, you know, playing at being a legit businessman, played by Brian Donlevy. And he basically tells him, look, if you don't let me take this picture of you, they'll just use some old picture where you're hiding your face and you look really shady. If you want to seem legit, show your face and let me get a good picture of you. And, you know, that'll make you seem more legit. And Donlevy buys it. And he also says, I like you, kid. Come over to my place. And basically, he then sort of starts to get involved with Donlevy, which leads him to entangle himself with Lawrence Tierney. These guys are both underworld types. And, you know, it's not a good place to be. It's not a good group of people to be involved with. And so it is one of those classic fatalistic noirs. It kind of goes from there and has some great moments and has a great ending. And I really like Howard Duff as this sort of arrogant, again, super ambitious and to a fault photographer. So I totally dug this. It was like a discovery for me. And so hats off to Kino for putting out this wonderful noir, Shakedown, which has a commentary by professor and film scholar Jason A. Ney, which is good. Good track. But yeah, highly recommended. Definitely good for noir fans. Shakedown. Okay, what else have we got here? Okay. I've got a few from... I'll have to show the other one in another video, but I'm gonna do a couple imports here. The first one is from Explosive Media. This is a company that I was told about by a fan of this show and of Pure Cinema, and thank you to her for pointing this label out to me, because they had some stuff. It's a German label. I got these direct from their website, links directly to Amazon Germany, and I got some stuff that I know isn't really available on Blu-ray in the States, and this is one of them. This is called The Last American Hero. It's a really great sports movie, a car racing movie about basically a moonshine running kid who gets involved in stock car racing, played by Jeff Bridges, has this incredible supporting cast of, Gary Busey, Valerie Perrine, Geraldine Fitzgerald, Oh man, there's so many people in this that you'll recognize. I'm blanking on all the cast members right now, but I was just really excited to get this Blu-ray for this film that I love, which has only ever been available on DVD, on Blu-ray. It is Region B locked, and it doesn't really have much in the way of extras, but it is a truly fantastic movie. And I won't go into the sort of details of what it's about, but it's sort of the naivete of a guy who is rising through the ranks and not understanding that there's just... Oh, Ed Lauder's in this movie. Ed Lauder is great in this. Oh my gosh, he's so good. Anyway, I won't spoil it, but this movie you can stream pretty much anywhere you can rent and buy movies, so you can watch it that way. But this Blu-ray did look really pretty good, and I was impressed with the transfer. Nice widescreen transfer. This character, Junior Jackson, Junior Johnson as he's called, he is based on a real guy, and so it's fun to kind of do some research after the fact and find out like what this moonshine running kid's deal was and how he got involved with stock car racing. And Jeff Bridges is just in that great period in the 70s when he's doing so many great films. So anyway, hats off to Explosive Media for putting out one of these gems that I so desired to have on Blu-ray. So that is an import, Region B locked, but definitely worth your time. Really good stuff. I also picked up, this one is on Amazon US. This is Swashbuckler. There's multiple versions of this on Amazon. There's one that I think is Australian, and I don't know how it compares to this, but the transfer on this is pretty darn good. And this movie is pretty crazy, especially pretty crazy considering the star power behind it and the fact that it hasn't been available. I mean, maybe it's been occasionally available streaming. It's not currently available streaming. But it is, Robert Shaw's follow-up to Jaws. It's in 1976. It stars James Earl Jones as like his swashbuckling buddy, Peter Boyle as like the baddie villain in this movie, Geneviève Bujold as sort of the love interest, part of the movie. The cast goes much deeper than that. It has some amazing stunt work. It has like an authentic pirate ship. It's just a classic swashbuckler tale told in the late 70s, maybe when that kind of movie wasn't particularly in vogue. Like calling back to that kind of movie at that time didn't light up the box office, despite the star power behind it. It's directed by James Goldstone, who did Roller Coaster, which is one of my favorite disaster movies. This is the year before he does that, I think. But I just remember I had a friend at my old video store I worked at, 20 years ago, and he was a big, big Geneviève Bujold fan. So anything she did, he bought. And I remember he bought the DVD of Swashbuckler, and I was like, what is that movie? And then I, checked out the DVD, and the DVD at the time wasn't even 16 by 9, meaning it wouldn't fill the 16 by 9 frame of a widescreen TV. It was, 4 by 3 letterboxed. So it's beautiful to see this movie 16 by 9 widescreen, color transfer, looks great, includes not much for features, but includes like a very old 9-minute behind the scenes making of, which is very grainy, like 16 millimeter, and then a Super 8 version or whatever as well. So not a lot of features, but I know that those features aren't included on the Australian version that you can also get. This too is Region B locked. You need a multi-region player to play it, but some have listed this as kind of a not great movie, but I really do think the spectacle of it and the cast really make it worthwhile and fun to watch. And I hadn't seen it in so long, so it was really kind of a wonderful thing to get a hold of this Blu-ray, which, as I said, I found on Amazon relatively cheap. There were used copies available, and it just looks great. So I don't know if this is going to get a release from Shout Factory or somewhere else. Who knows? Maybe it will, now that I bought it. Same thing will probably happen. Although this, speaking of Fox, this is a 20th Century Fox movie. Another one, I don't know if that's coming out anytime soon. This one, I am seeing some labels get Universal titles, so maybe it will get picked up. But for the meantime, I'm very happy with this import and do recommend it if you're into the cast. And then I've just got a couple that I watched recently. This one's called The Train Robbers, John Wayne movie with Anne Margaret and Rod Taylor, directed by stalwart genre guy and Bud Bedecker collaborator Burt Kennedy. He wrote a lot of the best Randolph Scott and Burt Kennedy westerns, and this is Burt Kennedy writing and directing. It doesn't quite have the same, oomph that those Randolph Scott and Bud Bedecker westerns have. It's a little more elaborate, a little more involved, but it does have a great cast. So not only do you get those guys, but you also get Ben Johnson, Christopher George, Bobby Vinton, Ricardo Montalban in a very sort of mysterious role. And the idea is basically that John Wayne is, I'll just read them. 3 Civil War veterans team up with a train robber's widow to recover a cool $500,000 in hidden gold. The widow, Anne Margaret, the kind who sticks out in all the right places, wants to clear her husband's name. The 3 friends, John Wayne, Rod Taylor, and Ben Johnson, want to aid her in collecting a $50,000 reward. Basically, they're going to find this gold that was hidden after her husband was killed and return the money for the reward so that she can clear his name. That's the plan. But the dead man's ex-partners, there was like 7 or 8 of them, may just want the gold and will kill to get it. There's actually a lot more. Those 7 have become an army of people, and that's kind of fun. So it's a rollicking caper from writer-director Burt Kennedy, a specialist in westerns with a comic touch. The Rounders, support your local sheriff. Here he sets a mood of amiable adventure among colorful characters, not stinting on the two-fisted action that's part of all the best Wayne westerns. And it's even got a little featurette on John Wayne, working with a western legend as well. Widescreen and a fun movie. Definitely has some really cool stuff when they get down to the nitty grit of the small band of folks against this giant army and how they maneuver themselves and hold them off. There's some really cool stuff they do, and I don't want to give it away, but there's some stuff in terms of tricks where you're like, oh man, that totally makes sense. Doing that to the horses or whatever. I'm giving away too much, but there's things that they do where you're like, that's really smart. Why don't more westerns, when they're against insurmountable odds, why don't they do these things? They're just really smart in the way they play it. And that's Burt Kennedy. He was a great writer and a great, ability, had a great ability with plot. So it's a fun movie. I'd never seen it before, and I enjoyed the cast very much. Older Rod Taylor, older John Wayne. Very fun. And young Christopher George. He's great. He's got an attitude and everything. So that is The Train Robbers. And then last but not least, I rewatched Zodiac. This is the director's cut. And boy, oh boy, this movie's celebrating about a 15th anniversary this year. It's from 2007, and it still creeps me out, this movie. I mean, obviously there have been some discoveries or some theories since this film came out that have come out, but it's still unclear. It's still such an incredibly engaging mystery as to this killer and how he really terrorized the Bay Area and thereabouts in the late 60s, and sent letters to the San Francisco Chronicle, saying print this cipher or I'll kill 12 people. And it's so tricky to know with all the pieces because they never really caught anybody. Were there some copycats involved here? Who was the real killer? And it's based on some real people, including Richard Graysmith, who is the sort of the novel that this is based on. He was a cartoonist at the Chronicle. He's played by Jake Gyllenhaal in the movie. But the police officer that Mark Ruffalo plays is based on an actual police officer that supposedly Steve McQueen studied a little bit when he was making Bullet. There's actually a little reference to that there. But Robert Downey Jr. is here. Anthony Edwards is great. He plays another cop with Ruffalo. The cast is just incredible. And it's just Fincher, maybe his best movie in my mind, my favorite of his films. This is the director's cut, and it is done up like the actual letters that were sent to the Chronicle, which is creepy. But based on the true story of the notorious serial killer and the intense manhunt he inspired, Zodiac is a superbly crafted and critically acclaimed thriller from director David Fincher, featuring an ensemble cast led by Jake Gyllenhaal, Robert Downey Jr., and Mark Ruffalo. Some really great features here. Commentary by Fincher, any commentary by Fincher I love, and this is no exception. Incredible because it incorporates not only filmmaking stuff, but historical stuff. And then you have Jake Gyllenhaal, Robert Downey Jr., Brad Fisher, James Vanderbilt, and James Ellroy in a second commentary. Zodiac Deciphered, an exhaustive behind-the-scenes documentary on the making of the movie, visual effects, previs. They really do use CG in the best possible way here. There's a couple shots that I absolutely love that you're just like, well, that looks good. Like, I can't tell that that's CG, but I know that you can't move a camera like that. So it's really great. This is The Zodiac Speaking, a feature-length documentary produced and directed by David Pryor, covering every aspect of the investigation, including interviews with the original investigators and the surviving victims. So that's incredible to have that. His name was Arthur Lee Allen, the truth about the prime suspect in the Zodiac case from the people who knew him and the police who investigated him. Just an incredible package. This is a 2-disc set and one of my favorite, contemporary Blu-rays that I own. But I just hadn't watched the movie in a while, and boy, does it hold up. I got to tell you. Anyway, I know I'm not selling anybody that doesn't know Zodiac's a good movie, but if you haven't watched it in 15 years, I had seen it, within the last 5 or 6, 7 years, I think, but it had been a minute, and I was just reminded how great the movie is and how creepy it is. Like the kind of movie where you really do go and like make sure your doors are locked when you're done and kind of look over your shoulder. It's not a horror movie per se, but it affects me like I remember the horror movies of my youth used to affect me. Horror movies don't affect me this way anymore, but this movie does. Anyway, so that's all I got for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. And I will talk to you very soon. Thank you so much.